Now that we've come out of Iowa, how is that going to inform, or will it not, what takes place in New Hampshire?
Well, Iowa probably won't have too much of an impact on New Hampshire at all. The electorates are very different. The turnout over in the Iowa caucuses is very low, 5 to 10%. So you tend to get the most ideological voters. In New Hampshire, we have turnout 40 to 50%. So you get more regular sort of voters. The second thing is that in Iowa, the Republican electorate tends to be very much more conservative and particularly socially conservative, where you've got a state like New Hampshire, where we're one of the least religious states in the country, and Republicans here are much more concerned about taxes and size of government than they are about social issues. And then finally, in New Hampshire, we've had a campaign going on for as long as the campaign has been going on in Iowa.
Yeah.
We're seeing from candidates directly rather than having to rely on what cues that the Iowa voters give us. So I don't think that it's likely to have much impact, with the one exception that Vivek Ramaswamy's dropping out of the race is likely to help Trump a little bit.
Where did you have him? I think it was about 5% in New Hampshire, Andrew. Does that all go to Trump?
We had him at about 8%. I'd say at 4 to 5% of those people are likely to go to Trump.
Yeah.
He's endorsed Trump, and most of the Ramaswamy voters said that Trump was their second choice in this race.
Well, it's a story of momentum here, and New Hampshire is supposed to be where Nikki Haley makes it happen. She had arguably a disappointing finish last night, even though she's talking about a two-person race at this point. I'm not quite sure how that happens, but this is where she's in striking distance, as you can see here, within single digits of Donald Trump. Saw another poll out today, Andrew, from ARG that shows them tied. Talk to us about the stakes here in New Hampshire, specifically between Trump and Haley, because I'm assuming you don't expect a lot out of Ron DeSantis there at 4%.
No, DeSantis isn't really doing well at all here. He's kind of pulled the plug on most of his campaign activities in the state. I'd say that the big thing to pay attention to is the Haley Trump race. And frankly, Haley has to win here, or she really doesn't have an avenue going forward. She's got a very slim opportunity to go after the nomination, even should she win New Hampshire. It would depend really on some momentum coming out of New Hampshire to help her in her home state of South Carolina. But the problem that we're facing right now in New Hampshire is that, yes, the independent, or really the undeclared voters, can vote in the primary, but they almost never, in fact, they have never historically determined who the winner of the New Hampshire primary is going to be. It's their party's registered voters. And in our most recent poll, Trump was leading Haley 58% to 21% among registered Republicans, whereas Haley was leading 43 to 17 among those undeclared voters who say they're going to vote in the Republican primary. So historically, there are a lot of things that are not in Haley's favor. But that said, this is a historic event anyway. One of the other factors with New Hampshire and Iowa is that no Republican candidate has ever won the Iowa caucuses and the New Hampshire primary in the same cycle, unless they were an incumbent president. And that doesn't bode well for the president.
Well, and that might, well, fascinating. We just got news that ABC News has canceled its debate in New Hampshire. Andrew, we knew earlier today that Nikki Haley said she would not attend. Ron DeSantis said he looked forward to debating two empty chairs in New Hampshire. Are we done now with debates? Donald Trump seemed to get something started here.
Well, unless Trump decides to jump into the debate, I think we're done. And there is potentially one other debate with CNN down on Sunday night, excuse me. But that remains to be seen. And I think the only way that either Haley or Trump will get in there is if Trump really feels threatened enough that he needs to make a statement and actually debate Haley. His strategy so far has been to stay out of the woods, to try to rise above all of the other candidates and presume that he's the incumbent to be, and not debate them. If he decides that he has to debate Haley, that means his campaign thinks he's in trouble. Haley also doesn't want to have the same sort of a food fight debate that she had with Ron DeSantis last week, which probably didn't help either of those candidates. She really needs to keep herself kind of above the fray and as the alternative to Trump, and that means not to be down in the mud with Trump.
Well, should he feel threatened? Your poll would suggest that that's a yes. The blowout that we saw last evening is not going to be duplicated in New Hampshire.
I don't think it is. His percentage of the New Hampshire Republican vote has been around 40%, low 40s for the past year. He has nowhere near the kind of MAGA support in New Hampshire that he does in some of the other states like Iowa or South Carolina. And I think that the message out of Iowa that was kind of missed a bit is that he, frankly, as the quasi-incumbent, only got about 50% of the vote, which means half of the Republicans and a very conservative Republican caucus electorate out there in Iowa didn't want him. And he's got even less than that going into this primary. Our last poll only had him at 39%, meaning 60% of Republicans didn't like him. So he's got to be concerned that there is a block of Republicans out there, should they consolidate behind Haley, could bump him off in New Hampshire.
Trump and Haley both scheduling news events in New Hampshire today. I guess Ron DeSantis will get there eventually, but not before going to South Carolina. Andrew Smith, does that bother people in New Hampshire?
Probably not. It's not the first time, and frankly, voters here are paying more attention to what's going on with the people on the grounds, and it's the advertising still that's more important. We have a myth in New Hampshire that you got to meet the candidates 3 or 4 times before you can decide to vote for them. But the truth is that yes, you can meet every candidate if you want to. You can meet them several times. But the fact is, most people don't take advantage of it, and they're influenced by typical campaign activities like everyone else across the country is, meaning television ads, mailers, radio, et cetera, phone calls to their house to get them out to vote. So I think that those activities of the campaigns are far more important than whether or not the candidate is here, because frankly, you can't meet or see that many people in events compared with the number of people that you can reach through advertising.